But the problem with handguns in Canada is you can have all the laws you want. It's the illegal handguns that are the problem. So you can have telephone books full of regulations on how to legally deal with handguns. But if I'm a criminal, I really don't care because I'm a criminal and I don't follow the law. Therefore, in Canada, I think we have a bigger problem to some extent because in Canada, generally speaking, only the criminals have guns. Hello and welcome to Beneath the Law. My name is Gavin and Tighe here with Stephen Thiele. Stephen, how are you in this fine Sunday morning here in July in Ontario?
It's a beautiful day, Gavin. Downtown Toronto, very sunny, very hot. But we'll survive.
I have to say I'm blessed to be out of the city today, up in the hinterland. I was thinking to myself this morning, we complain about the weather a lot here in Canada, but for about 2 months of the year, I think it's the nicest place on the planet. The other 10, I don't know. Sometimes I'd say not so much, but what are you going to do? Anyways, today we're going to talk about one of the things that I think Canadians sometimes naively believe that you kind of look down their noses on our neighbors to the south. And one of the really distinctive issues, to my mind, of what defines a Canadian as opposed to an American, to a large extent, we have a lot of things in common, that's for sure. But one thing that we seem to diverge on is guns. Americans certainly have generally speaking, a very different view of guns than Canadians, generally speaking, do. In the United States, of course, the notion of the right to own a firearm, the right to carry a firearm, seems to almost be a religious belief in the minds of many Americans, and the right to bear arms. We can argue about that for hours of what that part of the Constitution means, but has certainly been elevated in the United States to, as I said, an almost religious belief, a mythical issue in the eyes of many Americans. Canadians, not so much. We don't really, for the most part. I think there are exceptions, obviously, but most Canadians, if a poll were taken, would agree that people shouldn't be walking around carrying guns.
I don't disagree with that. Look, the United States culture is a lot different. Their Constitution has a provision in it, as you mentioned. There's certainly, I think, in Canada, there's a distinction between handguns and long guns, right, or rifles. Governments have tried to restrict even rifle firearms to a lot of pushback from people who live in more rural communities in Canada. But with respect to handguns, I agree with you. I mean, we don't have the same real interest in wanting to carry handguns or use handguns. And even our government, I guess, in 2021 banned the sale of handguns.
Right. So, it's interesting. We can decry all of these things, but governments oftentimes will bring in policies that a lot of people don't agree with. But generally speaking, they bring in policies that most people do agree with because they want to get reelected. And the reality of banning handguns, I have my own view on, frankly, the uselessness of a law to ban handguns, because the problem with respect to handguns in Canada, and anyone who thinks we don't have a problem is, I think, sorely mistaken. But the problem with handguns in Canada is you can have all the laws you want. It's the illegal handguns that are the problem. So I can have telephone books full of regulations on how to legally deal with handguns. But if I'm a criminal, I really don't care because I'm a criminal and I don't follow the law. Therefore, in Canada, I think we have a bigger problem to some extent because in Canada, generally speaking, only the criminals have guns.
For the most part. I mean, look, there are legal gun owners, prior to the regulations coming into place. There are shooting clubs. People use guns, handguns there. And, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But people carrying handguns, walking down the street with a handgun, is a problem. And you're right that people who are carrying those handguns in general are criminals or gang members, uh, using smuggled guns from over the border. I mean,
Right.
as far as I'm aware, I don't think there's any a gun manufacturer in Canada. Most guns are made in the United States or elsewhere, and other than the legitimate sales of rifles um, and handguns previously, prior to this restriction that was implemented by government, most of those handguns come into our country through cross-border smuggling.
Yeah, I mean, Canada, let's face
So
it. I mean, we can talk about our relationship with the United States all we want, but we have the longest border in the world, I think, undefended border, certainly in the world, undefended for the moment, uh, with the United States. And it's a porous border. It is a massive landmass with a border across it, North America. And, to the south of us is probably the largest cache of weaponry ever known to human civilization. I think there was some statistic that there are more guns in the United States per capita than anywhere else on the planet. I mean, every single individual, I think, would have the equivalent of about 10 firearms. So you've got literally millions and millions of guns in the U.S. sold in various places with very little, generally speaking, regulation. We hear about gun shows, etc., where you can walk in there and they say, "Do you have a pulse? Here's your gun." You've got, and basically, millions of cars come across the border every day, and guns come across the border, and they generally are being sold or trafficked to people who want guns. And who wants guns? Well, criminals.
yeah,
They,
people who
criminals like
commit
guns.
crimes.
So
Yeah,
the reality of that is, so unfortunately, what we've got is a illicit handgun trade here in Canada. We have substantial issues with respect to the illegal use of firearms. I mean, I know that just anecdotally speaking, I mean, hearing about a shooting in Toronto 30 years ago would have been shocking. People would have been absolutely appalled that there had been any kind of a shooting in Toronto. Now, I think it's a rare occasion when you don't hear of at least 5 reports a night where people are, blowing off handguns all over the place. And now it's become, we're kind of immune to it, I think.
in some respects, we are. Look, there's no doubt that from a statistical standpoint, from what I understand, since 2009, there has been an 81% increase in violent offenses involving guns.
That's
And
astounding.
so that's staggering, right?
Yeah.
And look, uh, a handgun only really has one purpose, and that's to injure somebody or kill somebody. Well, I guess that's two purposes, but but that's what they do.
I think that I have a great. I'm not trying to offend anyone in the gun community, if I can call it that, the firearms community. But the reality of it is, it's a weapon. Weapons are made for one purpose. They can be defensive or offensive, but they are generally speaking made to injure somebody. I mean, a brass knuckles have one purpose. They are a weapon. They are not. Oh, I'm a brass knuckle collector. It's a no. They're you know knives have other purposes, maybe in the kitchen, but certain types of knives are made to hurt people.
Right.
Guns are made to hurt people. Now that may be, we need guns, some I suppose, for police officers and such, but we need guns because police officers need to at least have some sort of level playing ground with the criminals, because criminals, and frankly, sometimes have better guns than the police.
Well, semi-automatic handguns and handguns that get, I suppose, modified in certain respects. Look, there's no doubt that these things are problems.
So
Our podcast is really Why we're doing this podcast on handguns is the Ontario Court of Appeal certified a case, a class action lawsuit, against a gun manufacturer, Smith and Wesson, which will, I guess, going forward, should this case go forward, we don't know if there's going to be an appeal sought to the Supreme Court of Canada on this, but this class proceeding will determine, I think, for the first time in Canada, whether a gun manufacturer is liable for people being injured and killed because of the unauthorized use of a gun that was stolen, and that killed 2 people, injured 13 in a mass shooting on the Danforth here in Toronto in July of 2018.
Yeah, and I mean, let's just sort of rewind a bit. I mean, this we've had lots of comments, and keep them coming, by the way, on this podcast. But we are putting this out for a very broad section of listeners. I mean, some of whom are lawyers and are probably quite bored at a lot of the things we talk about, and others are going, "What the heck are they talking about?" So let's talk about a class action just really, really quickly. So class proceedings, of course, people have heard of these class actions, etc. And what they are, I think, is pretty important. So to they understand the context. So basically, what a class proceeding allows to happen is it allows a group of individuals who, on their own, may or may not have the wherewithal to put forward a lawsuit to sue someone. In fact, oftentimes you'll see class proceedings where the individual losses of the individual class members isn't really a whole heck of a lot. But when cumulatively, when you put it all together, it turns into a pretty big number. So while nobody would sue, let's say, for bother bringing a lawsuit for the $100 that they're out, but if there were 5 million people that lost $100, all of a sudden you get the picture that it makes it sense to aggregate those interests into a class. So what we have is legislation in Ontario and in actually I think every province in Canada except for Prince Edward Island, which apparently doesn't have class proceedings acts, but in Canada and the United States there are class actions whereby a representative plaintiff is allowed to bring an action in the name of the entire class or group of people who would be similarly affected, and one lawyer or one law firm or a group of law firms then represent that class. So what they do is they seek to what's called certified as a class. So they go to court and they say, hey, Your Honor, here this is a class of people that we represent, that it's proper that this be brought as a class proceeding. The what they say is, look, there's an identifiable group of people, they have common issues, and that I'm a suitable representative for that group of people. And generally speaking, it's their first battleground in a class action, but it's really the starting point for a class proceeding. It really is to say, hey, court, let this claim proceed as a class proceeding. So the certification motion is a big deal in class actions, because if the class action is certified, that opens up a whole series of opportunities for that class proceeding to go forward. And defendants will very much dig in and try to fight these certification motions, because defendants don't want, for the most part, class actions against them. And Smith and Wesson was no different. So here we had and you can tell our listeners a bit about what this particular claim was, but we had a representative plaintiff going to court and saying, certify this claim against Smith and Wesson in regards to this Danforth Avenue shooting as a class. Smith and Wesson saying, no, it doesn't meet the test.
Right, and it's important to note that a class certification motion really puts the court in the position of gatekeeper. And to that extent, the tests have developed with respect to class proceedings that all a plaintiff really needs to show is some basis in fact that they have a cause of action. They don't need to prove the merits of their case. And that's why this certification is so important, because the original motion judge who heard the certification motion actually denied the certification. And essentially the reason, so the Ontario Court of Appeal overturned that decision, and the reason for that is that the motions judge applied a merits-based analysis to the causes of action that were claimed.
Right. So, and we could tell a little bit about what the cause of action, I think, is pretty novel. So the cause of action is that, as with any number of devices that we now have, I mean, your phone, uh, there's what's called smart technology, which says, when I go to look at a message on my phone looks at now, recognizes my face, poor phone, and can open up, or fingerprint or something of that nature. There's biometrics that are built into all sorts of devices that we have that now identify us as the authorized user. So, when I go, it's not even a password anymore. It's a biometrical type switch, if I can call it that turns my phone on or allows me access to it. And similarly, you can incorporate that into a firearm such that the firearm would recognize the fingerprints of the authorized user, or I don't think you want to point the gun at your face so it recognizes you, but hopefully that's not the technology. I'm not that familiar with it. Another one I've heard about, which I thought might have been a little bit more useful, frankly, although you get back into it again, it's one where you have like a watch, like a kind of like an iWatch or whatever it is that you wear, and the gun will only work when it's in proximity to the watch or some other device. So there's a key mechanism. And that technology, I suppose, is adaptable to guns, but gun manufacturers, you can explain that to our listeners why, but don't use it.
Yeah, so, smart gun technology, let's call it that, certainly has been talked about probably, for more than a decade now. Whether it's a fingerprint or a palm print, or, as you say, using some other device that you have to have near the gun in order to use it and for it to fire. It's been around for some time, and there have been a lot of mass shootings, as we know from news reports in the United States. The Sandy
and
Hook,
Canada.
in Canada as well, but less. The Sandy Hook shooting, at schools and come to mind.
Well, there was just one the other week in Idaho where someone set a fire and then waited for the firefighters to come and started shooting them.
Oh gosh,
just horrific. I mean,
it is
crazy.
Absolutely. And anyway, so with civil claims being brought in the U.S., Smith and Wesson actually entered into a preliminary agreement as part of a settlement that they would adopt, smart gun or authorized user technology in their handguns, to lessen these kinds of events. And then a few years later, U.S. Congress granted them immunity from third-party liability for shootings. And so then they never implemented this technology. And that's really what the lawsuit is all about here in Canada, that this weapon that was used in the Danforth shooting,
which was stolen
from
a legal cache of guns by a firearms dealer at the time.
Yeah, in Saskatchewan, and the gun wound its way into Toronto. The smart gun technology did not exist for this weapon, and so therefore the plaintiffs have brought a claim. The only claim that was certified was a negligence claim against Smith and Wesson for their failure to implement smart gun technology in their firearm. The weapon that was used was actually one that was made for police and military purposes. And the shooter got hold of it and shot people coming out of shops and restaurants on the Danforth, people who were just going about their business, innocent victims. Absolutely terrible. And so a law firm representing, people and families decided to bring this class proceeding against Smith and Wesson. Like I said, the Ontario Court of Appeal reversed the original motion judge's decision, which did not certify the class action, and has now certified it for that negligence claim.
Yeah, I mean, in the certification motion, again, just so everyone understands, is merely, as you point out, the gatekeeper function. And in my own mind, what I think when I think about it as a very simplified version of the test that is applied, is there's no finding by any stretch that this action will succeed in the sense that it will be
Right.
successful. The court has sort of left it to look at it and say it might succeed. It's possible. It's theoretically okay. If all of these facts come together, then yeah, that could survive. That case could be potentially successful. But to my own mind, there's so many aspects of the claim that just seem so tenuous. And I'm putting it in different contexts beyond guns. I mean, guns are such a, I hate to use the word trigger to people because they just send everybody into a one camp or the other. I mean, it is a very divisive issue. But there are lots of other technologies, for example, in lots of other devices that frankly kill a lot more people than guns do, at least in Canada. I'm thinking of automobiles, for example. There are certainly devices that you could put on an automobile that would prevent someone from starting the car if they were intoxicated.
Right.
Like, there's a breathalyzer thing that you can use as an ignition starter. They put it on as sort of and why would that not apply? So why would not everyone who was killed by a drunk driver not sue auto manufacturers for not installing that technology in car? Because if the technology was there, then the drunk driver wouldn't have been able to start the car, and those people wouldn't have been hurt or killed. Why would that not fly?
It's I see that as being a little bit distinguishable from the gun issue, in terms of cars today are actually made with a lot of smart technology to prevent people from getting into accidents.
Not from drinking and driving.
Well, I don't disagree with that, but
at least my car doesn't have a straw that pops out of the steering wheel. But I don't know, maybe that I can blow into. But I mean, maybe it should.
You know what? Look, it's very interesting, but looking at it from the opposite side, if this proceeding can be certified, why couldn't someone who was killed by a drunk driver bring a claim against an auto manufacturer for not, if it's a newer car and the technology exists, why is it not implemented by auto manufacturers?
I don't know what the difference is. I mean, to me, just in a general, there's a lot of differences, obviously, but it is technology designed to prevent the harmful use of a piece of equipment, right? The illegal use of a piece of equipment that theoretically is not that complicated to put in place.
No, and look, from the gun manufacturer standpoint, if the technology is not very expensive to implement it, why wouldn't you?
So I'm thinking here, Stephen, why don't we run out and start a class action against every auto manufacturer? It's Sunday now. We can start that Monday morning. We better get it up before the podcast airs, or a whole whack of plaintiff class action lawyers will be beating us to our own.
Yeah, what a good idea, Gavin.
quick! We're gonna have to stop this podcast right now while we run off and draft a claim. Find ourselves a representative plaintiff. Unfortunately, sadly, probably somebody injured by a drunk driver. Not a joking matter, but literally, when you think about it, there are any number of pieces of equipment that theoretically could have safety mechanisms put on them that would, if in place, have prevented all sorts of injuries. I mean, I don't know, chainsaw guards, or you name it. You could go on and on and on about everything that injures people. And there's some sort of device, I suppose, that would prevent or minimize that risk.
Yeah, look, lawsuits generally can influence product manufacturers, right? You have product liability cases. Automobiles. Cigarettes is certainly probably the biggest equivalent, right? We know cigarettes cause cancer. Well, why did cigarette companies not issue warnings in terms of their product? Why are they marketing a product that causes so much money to be spent in our healthcare system? And look, my uncle died. He was a heavy smoker, so he ended up getting heart disease and died from
Yeah.
that many years
Everybody knows
ago.
someone,
Yeah,
at
well,
least
right.
one person.
So here we are in terms of gun manufacturers. You've got smart technology. It doesn't seem to be something that costs a lot to implement. So
Yeah.
why can't you? Right? But
Yeah. I mean, we get into this whole. Now we come back again. You mentioned it in passing, but they were given what I'll call an amnesty from the
yeah,
requirement to do this by the U.S. Congress, and we get into that back again to the cultish, religious almost fervor around guns because it was a theoretical. Theoretically, the gun manufacturers said this was an infringement on people's right to bear arms in the U.S. because it was a limitation on that in some way. I mean, I don't really understand the argument. I guess isn't a safety switch on a handgun, and I'm not a firearms person. Any of the firearms people will be rolling their eyeballs listening to me talk about it. But um, isn't there a safety switch on every gun that like stops it from firing? Is that not kind of this is just an electronic version? Having said that, um, I don't know about you, but it seems to me every time I'm kind of anxious to see an email and I see it pop up, and then I got to open my phone. That's the time that my phone says, "Oh, your face not recognized. Insert your password." So that would probably be me as someone was breaking into my house if I were in the U.S. And so, people who are sitting there going, "Well, I need the gun. I don't want the gun to lock up with these crazy safety features. When I need to use it, I need to use it." And I guess there's some kind of merit to that. I mean, I think if you're a legitimate, um, you know, gun owner, I mean, or a police officer, when you need to use your gun, you need to use it. You don't need to have time to input your password before you use it.
yeah. I think there are some practical considerations there. One of the practical issues that strikes me about this certification, if we play out the string, let's assume that the plaintiffs are successful. How are
Yeah,
they ever going to enforce a judgment
they're
when
not.
right? You're looking at a company that is located in the United States of America. They do 95% of their business in the United States. I don't think they're making a heck of a lot of money in Canada selling their guns to police forces and military. If you're looking at a wrongful death suit with family law claims, I mean, a class action lawsuit could generate millions and millions of dollars in damages, and then you need
Mm,
to enforce this in the U.S., and it's really against their public policy to hold a gun manufacturer liable because they have immunity or amnesty.
right.
So a court in the United States is probably going to be inclined to not permit the enforcement of a Canadian judgment against a U.S. based gun manufacturer based on U.S. legislation.
Yeah, and I mean, look, it's difficult enough to try to enforce a Canadian judgment in the United States. Even an innocuous judgment, a contract claim, to take it to the U.S., you basically have to start another proceeding in the United States. In Canada, it's much easier, frankly, to take an American judgment and enforce it here. We're quite open to that, but it is difficult to enforce a Canadian judgment. American courts don't necessarily automatically recognize the validity of Canadian judgments. They should, but this one, there's no. I think there's zero chance that a U.S. court would enforce a Canadian judgment against a gun manufacturer where there is amnesty in the United States for the
Right.
very issue that the gun manufacturer is being found liable for in Canada.
And look, we're running out of time here, but that's why we're talking about beneath the law, because you can look at the face value of this judgment, and I'm
Yeah, well, it
sure
looks like a good idea on its face. When you think
exactly.
when you get down to the nitty gritty, like when can I cash my check? The answer is never, because there's never going to be a check that, in my view, unless they have assets here in Canada that you could somehow seize. And I would think that they would be long gone by the time, or they would go through bankruptcy proceedings if there was sufficient judgment. But in any event, that is ultimately civil judgments, class proceedings or otherwise. Ultimately, the only thing that comes out of them is a damage award. And a damage award says, you, Mr. Defendant, shall pay plaintiff X dollars. That's it. Nobody's going to jail. Nobody's losing their kids. Nobody's losing that type, their liberty or respect to it. It's just pay the money. And if you can't collect the money, the judgment isn't worth very much.
Right. It's a paper judgment.
Paper judgment. And once again, Stephen, great talk, a very, very interesting, a loaded discussion. Pardon the pun. Doug wanted me to give one, so couldn't leave him hanging. Doug Downs, by the way, our producer, thanks so much for another wonderful episode. And Stephen, great to see you as always. And always remember, if no one is above the law, then everyone is beneath it.